You're standing in one of the most beautiful cities in the Roman Empire. The sun is warm on your skin. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the air. Children are laughing in the streets. Merchants are hawking their wares in the forum. Everything is perfect. Except for one thing. That mountain looming in the distance, the one you've lived under your entire life. The one that's always been there, quiet and peaceful, covered in vineyards and olive groves. It's about to kill almost everyone you've ever known. This is the true story of how I survived the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. My name is Marcus, and I was 17 years old when the world ended. What I'm about to tell you isn't just history from a textbook. This is what it actually felt like to live through one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in human history. And let me tell you something right now. Everything you think you know about Pompeii, everything you've seen in movies or read in books, it doesn't even come close to the reality of what happened that day. So buckle up. This is going to be intense. Let me take you back to the morning of August 24th, 79 AD. Actually, scratch that. Let me take you back a few days earlier, because you need to understand what life was like before everything changed. Pompeii wasn't just some random Roman town. This place was thriving. We had about 20,000 people living within the city walls, and the surrounding area was even more populated. We had theaters, bathhouses, temples, forums. We had running water. We had street food vendors on every corner. We had bars where men would gather to drink wine and complain about politics. Sound familiar? Yeah, we weren't that different from you. I lived with my family in a modest home near the forum. My father was a merchant who traded in wine and olive oil. My mother managed our household with an iron fist. I had two younger sisters who drove me absolutely insane and an older brother who had already moved to Rome to seek his fortune. Mount Vesuvius was just there, always there. We called it the mountain, and honestly, most of us didn't even think about it. Sure, we knew it was a mountain. We knew the slopes were incredibly fertile, which is why so many vineyards covered them. But dangerous? Never crossed our minds. Here's the thing about Vesuvius that nobody tells you. It hadn't erupted in living memory. Not in my lifetime, not in my father's lifetime, not even in my grandfather's lifetime. The last major eruption had been over 800 years earlier. To us, Vesuvius was just a mountain. A big, peaceful, beautiful mountain that gave us rich soil and good wine. We had no idea we were living on borrowed time. Now, I need to be honest with you about something. The eruption didn't just happen out of nowhere. There were signs. We just didn't know how to read them. About 17 years before the big eruption in 62 AD, we had a massive earthquake. And I mean massive. It damaged buildings all over Pompeii. The temple of Jupiter in the forum was practically destroyed. Homes collapsed. People died. I was just a baby when that happened, so I don't remember it. But my parents talked about it sometimes. They talked about how scared they were, how the ground shook so violently that you couldn't stand up, how the rumbling sounded like the gods themselves were angry. But you know what? We rebuilt. Humans are resilient like that. We fixed our buildings, we reinforced our walls, we moved on with our lives, and then came the summer of 79 AD. The days leading up to the eruption were weird. Looking back now, knowing what I know, the signs were everywhere. But at the time, we rationalized everything away. The wells started going dry. My mother complained about it constantly. She'd send me and my sisters to fetch water, and we'd have to walk further and further to find a working well. "It's just the summer heat," my father would say. "It'll rain soon." Animals were acting strange. Dogs were barking at nothing. Horses were skittish. Birds would suddenly take flight for no apparent reason, whole flocks of them darkening the sky as they fled. Somewhere. Anywhere but here. "Animals are stupid," people would laugh. "They're probably just sensing a storm coming." And the earthquakes. Oh, the earthquakes. They'd been happening for weeks. Small ones, mostly. Little tremors that would make the oil lamp swing and the pottery rattle. We'd pause our conversations, wait for the shaking to stop, then continue like nothing happened. Just aftershocks from the big one, the old men would say knowingly. Been happening for years, nothing to worry about. Can you see what we were doing? We were explaining away every single warning sign because admitting the truth was too terrifying. Because if we admitted that something was wrong with the mountain, what could we even do about it? Where would 20,000 people go? So we stayed. We kept living our lives. We kept pretending everything was fine. Until the morning of August 24th, when everything stopped being fine. I woke up that morning to my mother's voice calling me for breakfast. It was a normal day. Completely, utterly normal. I ate bread dipped in olive oil. I argued with my younger sister about something stupid I can't even remember now. I complained about having to help my father at the warehouse later. Just a normal day. The weather was beautiful. Hot, sure, but it was August in southern Italy. Of course it was hot. The sky was clear and blue. There was barely any wind. It was the kind of day where you'd want to spend the afternoon at the bathhouse, relaxing in the cool water, gossiping with friends. I remember my father was in a good mood. He'd just closed a big deal for a shipment of wine to Rome. He was whistling as he got ready to go to the forum. My mother was planning the menu for a dinner party we were hosting in 3 days. 3 days. As if we had 3 days left. I left the house around mid-morning. My father wanted me to check on a shipment at the docks in the nearby town of Herculaneum, about 7 miles away. I was supposed to verify the inventory and make sure everything was ready for transport. I was annoyed about it, if I'm being honest. I had plans with my friends that afternoon, but I was a good son, so I went. That decision saved my life. I was about halfway to Herculaneum, walking along the coast road when it happened. The sound came first. Have you ever heard thunder up close? Like really close? That deep, rumbling boom that you feel in your chest as much as you hear it? Multiply that by 1,000. Make it deeper. Make it longer. Make it sound like the earth itself is screaming. That's what I heard. I stopped dead in my tracks. Other travelers on the road stopped too. We all looked around, confused. Where was that sound coming from? It was a clear day. There wasn't a storm cloud in sight, and then someone pointed. The mountain, they whispered. I turned to look at Vesuvius, and my blood ran cold. There was a cloud rising from the summit, but not a normal cloud. This thing was wrong. It was rising straight up into the sky like a column, darker than any storm cloud I'd ever seen. It was moving fast, growing, spreading, and as I watched, it started to take on a shape. One of the travelers, an old woman, said what we were all thinking. It looks like a pine tree. She was right. The cloud was rising in a perfect vertical column, then spreading out at the top in branches, just like an enormous pine tree. Except this tree was made of ash and smoke and death, and it was growing bigger with every passing second. People started running, some back toward Pompeii, toward their families, others away from the mountain, toward what they hoped was safety. I just stood there, frozen, watching this impossible thing happen. And then the ground started shaking, not like the little tremors we'd gotten used to. This was different. This was violent. I fell to my knees, unable to keep my balance. The road itself seemed to be rippling like water. I could hear screaming, both from people around me and from the earth itself. I don't know how long the shaking lasted. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. Time does weird things when you're terrified. When it finally stopped, I did the only thing I could think of. I started running back toward Pompeii, toward my family. I had to get to them. I had to make sure they were safe. I had to get them out. But as I ran, I kept looking back at that cloud. It was still growing. It had to be miles high now, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow over the entire region. And then I saw it start to collapse. You have to understand something about volcanic eruptions. When Vesuvius exploded, it wasn't like lava slowly oozing down the mountainside like you might picture. That would have been survivable. People could have walked away from that. No, this was different. This was catastrophic. The column of ash and rock and gas that was shooting up into the sky, it was being propelled by an explosion that had the energy of multiple atomic bombs. The pressure that had been building up inside the mountain for centuries was being released all at once. Vesuvius wasn't just erupting, it was exploding. As I ran toward Pompeii, pumice stones started falling from the sky. These weren't little pebbles. These were chunks of volcanic rock, some as small as grapes, others as big as my fist. They were light because they were full of air bubbles, but they were still rocks, and they were falling from miles up in the sky. One hit me on the shoulder, and I cried out in pain. Another narrowly missed my head. All around me, people were getting hit. Some were bleeding. Some were knocked unconscious. The road was becoming littered with these stones, making it harder to run. The sky was getting darker. That massive cloud was spreading over us like a blanket, blocking out the sun. It was midday, but it looked like late evening. Then it looked like night. The air smelled wrong. Have you ever smelled sulfur? Rotten eggs? Imagine that smell, but 100 times stronger. It burned my nose and throat. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. I made it back to Pompeii around noon, maybe a little after. The city was in chaos. People were running in every direction. Some were trying to leave the city, carrying whatever possessions they could grab. Others were running deeper into the city, trying to get to their families. Some were running to the temples, praying to the gods for salvation. The pumice was falling heavier now. It was piling up in the streets, already ankle-deep in some places. The sound was deafening. This constant patter of stones hitting roof tiles, hitting the ground, hitting people. And underneath that, the continuous roar from the mountain. I fought my way through the panicking crowds toward my home. It took forever. The streets were packed with people and animals and carts. Everyone was screaming. Children were crying. Dogs were barking. It was like every nightmare you've ever had, all happening at once. When I finally reached my house, I found my family in the atrium. My mother was on her knees, praying to our household gods. My sisters were hugging each other, crying. My father was staring up at the opening in our roof, watching the pumice fall into our impluvium, the shallow pool in the center of our atrium. "Marcus!" my mother screamed when she saw me. She ran to me and grabbed my arms. "Thank the gods you're alive. We have to leave. We have to leave right now." My father turned to look at me. His face was pale. "Son," he said, and his voice was steady, but I could hear the fear underneath. "Go pack whatever you can carry. Food, water, warm clothes. We're leaving the city." "What about our things?" one of my sisters wailed. "What about my jewelry, my clothes?" "Forget them," my mother snapped. "We take what we can carry and we leave now." But my father hesitated. I could see it in his eyes. He was looking around our home, at the furniture his father had made, at the beautiful frescoes on the walls, at the silver dishes we used for special occasions. This was everything he had, everything he'd worked his entire life to build. "Father," I said, "Mother's right. We have to go." He nodded slowly. Yes, of course." We spent maybe 10 minutes gathering supplies. My mother filled a bag with bread, dried fruit, cheese. My father grabbed a leather pouch filled with coins. I found extra cloaks for all of us. My sisters cried as they said goodbye to their favorite things. The pumice kept falling. It was knee-deep in the atrium now. We had to wade through it to get to the door, and that's when my father made a decision that I'll never forgive him for and never stop understanding. "Wait," he said. "I need to go to the warehouse. We have shipments there. Money. Goods. Everything." "No!" My mother grabbed his arm. "We leave now, right now. The mountain—" "I know," he interrupted. "But that warehouse represents years of work, our entire fortune. If I can just secure it, if I can just make sure. You'll die, I shouted at him. Father, please. He looked at me, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. Fear versus duty, survival versus responsibility. Take your mother and sisters, he said finally. Go to the harbor, try to find a boat. I'll meet you there in an hour, I promise. My mother was crying now. Please don't do this. Please. He kissed her forehead. 1 hour, I promise. I'll meet you at the harbor. And then he was gone, running out into the chaos, leaving us standing in our pumice-filled atrium. I never saw him again. My mother made a decision right then that saved 3 lives. She grabbed my arm in my sister's hands and said, "We're leaving, now." We stepped out into the street, and the world had transformed into something from a nightmare. The pumice was deeper now, maybe waist-high in some places. It was still falling, a constant rain of light but deadly rock. The sky was completely black. Not dark gray, black, like someone had extinguished the sun. People had started tying pillows to their heads for protection. Others were holding wooden planks or pieces of furniture over their heads like umbrellas. We didn't have anything, so we just pulled our cloaks over our heads and tried to run. But you couldn't really run. Not through pumice that deep. It was like trying to run through snow, except this snow was made of rock and it kept getting deeper. The city was dying around us. I could hear buildings collapsing under the weight of the pumice on their roofs. That sound, the crack of wooden beams giving way, the crash of tiles shattering, the screams of people trapped inside. I'll hear it in my nightmares for the rest of my life. The air was getting harder to breathe. The sulfur smell was overwhelming now, and there was ash mixed in with the pumice. Fine ash, getting into your eyes, your nose, your mouth. Every breath was a struggle. We tried to stick to the main streets where the pumice wasn't as deep, but everyone had the same idea. The crowds were impossible. We were all moving in this slow, desperate shuffle toward the city gates. And then my younger sister, Julia, fell. 1 second she was there, holding my hand. The next, she'd tripped over something buried under the pumice and gone down face first. "Julia!" my mother screamed. I dove down to grab her, plunging my arms into the pumice. It was hot, not scalding, but warm. That's when I realized this stuff was coming from inside the earth. It was bringing the heat of the underworld with it. I found Julia's arm and pulled her up. She was coughing, gasping, her face covered in gray ash. She looked like a ghost. "I can't," she wheezed. "I can't breathe, I can't." "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "You can and you will. We're getting out of here." A man stumbled past us. His face burned, his clothes smoldering. He was mumbling something about fire, about burning rain. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. We kept pushing forward. My mother was in front, using her body to forge a path through the crowd. I was in the middle with Julia. My other sister, Lucia, was behind me. It took us an hour to travel what should have been a 10-minute walk. An hour of struggling through increasingly deep pumice, of breathing air that was more ash than oxygen, of dodging falling debris and panicking crowds. We finally made it to the city gate. The one facing away from Vesuvius, toward the coast, toward the harbor, and the promise of boats that might take us to safety. But when we got outside the city walls, we realized something terrible. We weren't escaping into safety. We were just moving from one nightmare into another. The entire landscape was buried. The farms, the roads, the villas, everything was under feet of pumice. The olive trees that had dotted the hillsides were now just broken branches sticking out of a gray wasteland. And it was still falling. People were scattered across the landscape, all trying to make their way to the coast. We could see the sea in the distance, or at least we could see where it should be. It was hard to tell through the falling ash and the darkness. "Come on," my mother said. "The harbor isn't far." We started making our way down the slope toward the coast. It was harder than walking through the city streets. Here there was no reference point. No walls to guide you, just endless grey pumice under a black sky with rocks still falling from above. People were collapsing around us, some from exhaustion, some from being hit by larger chunks of pumice. Some were just giving up, sitting down in the ash and refusing to go any further. "Don't look at them," my mother commanded. "Keep walking, keep moving, don't stop." Julia was crying. Lucia was praying under her breath. I was trying to be strong for them, but honestly, I was terrified. I was 17 years old, and I was watching the world end. And then we heard it. Another explosion from the mountain. Louder than before. Deeper. The kind of sound you feel in your bones. We all turned to look back at Vesuvius. The mountain was barely visible through the ash and darkness, but we could see enough. The eruption column had grown even larger. It must have been 20 miles high now, maybe more, and as we watched, the column started to collapse. That's when I understood what the burned man had meant about burning rain. The column wasn't just ash and rock, it was superheated gas, and when it collapsed, all that heat came rushing down the mountainside. We couldn't see it clearly through the darkness and distance, but we could see the glow, a horrible orange-red glow that was moving. Fast. "Run!" someone screamed. "Run!" And we ran. Okay, I need to explain something about what was happening, because it's important for understanding why so many people died. When that eruption column collapsed, it created what scientists today call a pyroclastic surge. Back then, we didn't have a name for it. We just knew it as death incarnate. Imagine an avalanche. Now replace the snow with gas and ash heated to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Make it move at over 100 miles per hour. Make it roll over everything in its path. Hills, valleys, buildings, people. That's what was coming down the mountain toward us. The first surge didn't reach Pompeii directly. It went the other direction, toward Herculaneum. The people of Herculaneum thought they were safer than us because they were further from the summit. They thought they had more time. They were wrong. The surge hit Herculaneum around midnight. Everyone who was still in the city died instantly. The heat alone was enough to kill them before the ash and rock even buried them. I didn't know this at the time, of course. I only learned about it later, but we could see the glow. We could see that something terrible was happening. We kept stumbling toward the coast, toward the harbor. My legs were burning from the effort of walking through the pumice. My lungs felt like they were on fire from breathing the ash-filled air. My sisters were sobbing, but we kept going. What choice did we have? When we finally reached the harbor, my heart sank. The scene was chaos. Hundreds of people were crowded on the docks, all trying to get onto boats. But there weren't enough boats. Not even close. And the few boats that were there were having their own problems. The sea had turned violent. Not from a storm, but from the eruption itself. The explosions were creating seismic waves. The water level kept changing, and the wind from the eruption column was creating these weird, swirling gusts that made it almost impossible to sail. Some boats were leaving anyway, packed with people beyond their capacity. I watched one overloaded fishing boat try to push away from the dock. It made it maybe 100 yards before a wave capsized it. People who couldn't swim were screaming as they went into the water. My mother was looking around desperately. "We need a boat. We need to find someone who will take us." But I could see it was hopeless. Even if we found a boat, even if we could get on it, where would we go? The entire bay was affected. The eruption wasn't just destroying Pompeii, it was destroying everything for miles around. "Mother," I said, "look." I pointed back toward Pompeii. The glow was brighter now, and we could hear a new sound, a rushing, roaring sound like wind but worse, louder, angrier. Another surge was coming. "We can't stay here," Lucia said. Her voice was surprisingly calm. "The harbor is right on the coast. If that thing reaches here..." She was right. The harbor was a death trap. If the surge reached this far, everyone here would die. We'd be trapped between the burning cloud and the sea. "We need to go inland," I said. "We need to get to higher ground." My mother looked at me like I was crazy. "Inland? Toward the mountain?" "Away from the coast," I clarified. "South, around the bay. We need distance and we need altitude." An old man standing near us overheard. "The boy's right," he said. "I've seen eruptions before. Never this big, but I've seen them. The hot clouds flow like water. They follow the low ground. We need to get high." Other people were starting to have the same realization. Panic was spreading through the crowd as people understood that the boats weren't going to save them, that the harbor might be the worst place to be. People started running again. Some went back toward Pompeii, hoping to find shelter in the buildings. Others scattered in different directions, each convinced they knew the way to safety. We went south, along the coast at first, then cutting inland. The next several hours are a blur in my memory. I remember walking. Endless walking through endless pumice under an endless black sky. I remember the sound of the mountain, constantly roaring, constantly threatening. I remember the ground shaking every so often, making us stop and huddle together until it passed. I remember Julia collapsing and me having to carry her on my back. I remember Lucia finding a dead donkey partially buried in pumice and crying because she'd always wanted a donkey of her own. I remember my mother praying, constantly praying to every god she could think of, and I remember the moment when the second major surge hit Pompeii. We were maybe 3 miles away by then. Far enough that we weren't in immediate danger. Close enough that we could see and hear everything. It was sometime in the middle of the night. I don't know the exact time. How could I? The sun had been blocked out for hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. But I'll never forget what I saw. The glow got brighter. Much brighter. And then we heard the roar. This deep, terrible roar that sounded like the earth was tearing itself apart. The surge came down the mountain like a glowing avalanche. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. It flowed into Pompeii like a wave, engulfing buildings, flooding streets, consuming everything in its path. People who were still in the city, and there were many, either trapped or sheltering in place or still trying to gather their possessions. They died right then. Some from the heat, some from breathing the superheated gas, some from being buried under the ash and debris. My father was in that city. My father, who had gone to save our warehouse, our money, our possessions. He died trying to save things that didn't matter. My mother let out this sound when the surge hit. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was something else. Something raw and primal. The sound of a woman who knew she'd just become a widow. She collapsed to her knees in the pumice. My sisters held her while she cried. I just stood there, watching the city that had been my home disappear under a glowing blanket of death. We couldn't stay where we were. Even 3 miles away, the heat from the surge was noticeable, and we had no idea if another surge would come. For all we knew, the next one might be bigger, might reach further. So we kept walking, through the darkness, through the falling ash and pumice, through a landscape that no longer looked like anything I recognized. We weren't alone. All around us, scattered across the countryside, were other refugees, other survivors stumbling through the ash, looking for safety that might not exist. Some people were helping each other. I saw a man carrying a woman who couldn't walk. I saw a group of slaves supporting their elderly master. I saw families huddled together, protecting their children, but I also saw darker things. I saw people abandoning the injured to save themselves. I saw men fighting over a dropped bag of food. I saw someone, I don't even know who, try to rob my mother before I pushed them away. Disaster brings out the best and worst in people. Around dawn, though we couldn't see the sun, we could just barely sense the light getting incrementally less dark. We found a farmhouse on a hillside, or what was left of a farmhouse. The roof had collapsed under the weight of the pumice, but 3 of the walls were still standing. A dozen other people had the same idea. We all crowded into this ruined building, sharing the meager protection it offered. Everyone was in bad shape. We were all covered in grey ash, looking like statues. Our eyes were red and streaming from the irritation. Our throats were raw from breathing bad air. We were exhausted, terrified, and broken. One man had a burn across his arm from a hot pumice stone. A woman was coughing up blood. 2 children were crying for their father, who they'd been separated from in the chaos. We shared what little food and water we had. Not much, just enough to keep going. "How long will this last?" Julia asked. She was only 13. She looked even younger now, covered in ash, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I admitted. An old woman in the corner, wrapped in a ragged cloak, spoke up. "The gods are angry," she said. "This is punishment for our sins, for our greed, for our pride." "The gods have nothing to do with this," a man snapped. "It's the mountain. Just the mountain." They started arguing about the gods, about why this was happening, about whether we were being punished or if this was just bad luck. I didn't care about the why. I only cared about surviving. I stepped outside the ruined farmhouse to survey our surroundings. The pumice was still falling, though not as heavily as before. It was maybe 5 feet deep now. The entire world was buried under a grey blanket. And in the distance, through the ash-filled air, I could see other survivors. Small groups scattered across the hillsides. All of us waiting. All of us hoping that this nightmare would end. The eruption continued all that day. The mountain kept roaring, the pumice kept falling, the sky stayed dark. My mother spent most of that time in silence, staring at nothing. My sisters clung to her. I tried to be strong, to be the man of the family now that my father was gone, but inside, I was just as scared as they were. What if it never stopped? What if the mountain kept erupting forever? What if the entire world was ending? That second night was worse than the first. Now we weren't moving, we were just sitting, waiting. It gave us time to think, to remember, to mourn. I thought about my father, about the last time I'd seen him, about how I'd argued with him, told him he was stupid for going to the warehouse. I wished I'd hugged him, told him I loved him, given him some better last words than anger and fear. I thought about my friends. Were they alive? Dead? Trapped somewhere in the ruins of Pompeii? I thought about my home, about my room, about the life I'd had just 2 days ago when my biggest worry was helping my father with boring warehouse work. That life was gone. That boy was gone. I'd aged years in a single day. The morning of the 3rd day, August 26th, something changed. The roaring from the mountain got quieter. Not silent, but quieter. The pumice was falling more slowly, and most importantly, the sky started to lighten, not to blue, not to sunshine and beauty, but to a grey twilight that was still better than the absolute darkness we'd endured for nearly 2 days. People started emerging from wherever they'd taken shelter. We all looked like ghosts, covered head to toe in grey ash. You couldn't tell rich from poor, slave from free. We all looked the same, all equal in our suffering. Someone found a well that still had water. It was gritty with ash, but it was water. We all drank greedily, not caring about the taste. Food was a bigger problem. Most of us had eaten through whatever we'd brought with us. Some people started digging through the ash, trying to find farms or homes that might have food stores. Others were talking about trying to hunt, though what animals could have possibly survived this disaster? My mother finally spoke that morning, her first words in almost a day. "We need to find out what happened to the city," she said. "We need to know if—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. We all knew what she meant. We needed to know if my father was alive, if there was any chance he'd survived. "I'll go," I said. "No," my mother said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "Mother, I'm the fastest. I'm young. I can make the journey and be back by nightfall." We argued about it for an hour. She didn't want to risk losing me too. But finally, she agreed. What choice did we have? We needed to know. I set out around mid-morning, accompanied by 2 other men from our shelter who also had family in Pompeii. The journey that should have taken an hour took 3. The landscape was unrecognizable. Everything was buried under pumice and ash. Roads had disappeared. Trees were broken stumps. Buildings were shapeless mounds. And bodies. There were bodies. People who'd collapsed during the escape. People who'd been caught outside when the surge hit. People who'd been overcome by the fumes or the heat or the exhaustion. We tried not to look at them. What could we do? There were too many. We couldn't bury them all. When we finally got close to where Pompeii should be, we stopped and stared. The city was gone. I don't mean destroyed. I mean gone. Buried. The walls were barely visible above the pumice. The buildings were either collapsed or entombed. The streets didn't exist anymore. Pompeii, this thriving city of 20,000 people, had been erased. We carefully made our way closer, staying on the pumice that covered everything. It was stable enough to walk on now, compacted by its own weight. We could see places where people had tried to dig out after the surge. Desperate attempts to rescue loved ones trapped in buildings. But the ash had cooled and hardened. It was like trying to dig through concrete. My shop was right there, one of the men with me said, pointing at a mound of gray ash. Right there. I can see the corner of the wall. 20 years I ran that shop. 20 years. We tried to find my father's warehouse. I thought I knew where it was, but everything looked different. Finally, I found a partially exposed wall that I recognized. The warehouse had been on this street. We started digging, using our hands, pieces of wood we found, anything we could use. The ash was hard and hot, but we dug anyway. We found a door, or the top part of a door. It was buried under feet of pumice. "Hello," I shouted through the crack. "Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" Silence. We dug more, trying to clear the door enough to open it. It took an hour of back-breaking work. My hands were bleeding. My lungs were burning from breathing the ash we kicked up. Finally, we got the door open enough to squeeze through. The warehouse was filled with ash and pumice, but not completely. There was a space near the ceiling where the roof had held. We climbed up the pile of debris inside. And that's where we found them. My father and 3 other men. They'd taken shelter in the warehouse when the surge hit. They'd survived the initial heat and gas, but then they'd been trapped, buried alive in the darkness. They'd run out of air. They were sitting against the back wall, huddled together. My father's eyes were closed. He looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. I don't remember climbing down from that pile of ash. I don't remember leaving the warehouse. The next thing I remember clearly is being outside, on my knees, sobbing. One of the men with me put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. What could he say? We couldn't retrieve the bodies. We didn't have the tools or the manpower. All we could do was say a prayer and leave them there, in their tomb of ash. I made the journey back to my family in a daze. When I arrived and my mother saw my face, she knew. She didn't even have to ask. She just pulled me into her arms and we cried together. The eruption finally stopped on August 27th, 3 days after it began. 3 days that felt like 3 years. But even though the mountain was quiet, our nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning a new phase. Survivors were scattered all over the region. Tens of thousands of us, displaced, homeless, traumatized. We had nothing but the clothes on our backs and the memories of everything we'd lost. The days immediately after the eruption were spent just trying to stay alive, finding food, finding water, finding shelter. The Roman government eventually organized relief efforts, but it took time. In the meantime, we relied on the generosity of communities that hadn't been affected by the eruption. The city of Neapolis, what you know as Naples today, opened its gates to refugees. Other towns did the same, but there were too many of us. Too many people with nowhere to go and nothing to their names. My mother tried to contact my older brother in Rome. It took weeks for the message to reach him and for him to respond. When he finally did, he sent money and an invitation for us to come live with him. So we started the long journey north. My mother, my 2 sisters, and me. 4 survivors out of a family of 6. 4 people who had to figure out how to live with the loss and the trauma and the memories. The journey to Rome took weeks. We traveled with other refugees, all of us sharing carts, sharing food, sharing stories. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone had watched their world end. Some people couldn't handle it. I saw men and women who'd just given up, who'd lost everything and couldn't find a reason to keep going. Some took their own lives. Others just seemed to fade away, losing the will to eat or speak or move. But others showed remarkable resilience. I met people who'd lost everything but were already making plans to rebuild, to start over, to create new lives from the ashes of the old. Humans are like that, you know. We're incredibly fragile and incredibly strong at the same time. When we finally reached Rome, my brother was waiting for us. He barely recognized us. We were thin, worn, aged beyond our years. But we were alive. He had a small apartment in the city. It was cramped for 5 people, but after sleeping in ruins and on roadsides for weeks, it felt like a palace. That first night in Rome, I had a real bed for the first time since the eruption. I should have been relieved, grateful, happy to be safe. Instead, I cried myself to sleep, because being safe meant I had time to process everything that had happened, everything I'd lost, everyone who hadn't made it. The years after the eruption were hard, not in the same immediate, life-threatening way, but hard in a different, deeper way. My mother never really recovered. She did what she needed to do. She fed us. She kept our home running. She made sure we had what we needed. But a part of her had died in Pompeii. A part of her stayed buried under that ash with my father. My sisters and I tried to adjust to life in Rome. It was different from Pompeii. Bigger, more crowded, more impersonal. But it was safe, and safety mattered more than anything. I got a job working for a merchant, using the skills my father had taught me. The work was familiar, comforting even. It kept me busy, kept me from thinking too much about the past. But the memories never left. They couldn't. How do you forget watching your entire world end? How do you forget the sound of a city dying, the sight of death raining from the sky? I had nightmares for years. I'd wake up choking, convinced I was breathing ash. I'd hear the roar of the mountain in thunderstorms. I'd see the bodies of the dead in every crowd, and I wasn't alone. Other survivors had the same problems. We'd recognize each other sometimes, in markets or temples or bathhouses. There was a look in our eyes, a shared understanding of what we'd lived through. Sometimes we'd talk about it, share our stories, cry together. Other times we just nod at each other and move on, carrying our trauma privately. The Roman government did try to help. Emperor Titus organized relief efforts, sent money, appointed commissioners to deal with property issues. But what can any government really do in the face of such catastrophic loss? Some people tried to go back to Pompeii. In those first weeks and months after the eruption, they'd make the journey south, hoping to dig up their possessions, recover their wealth, find their lost loved ones. Most of them found nothing but ash. The city was buried too deep, the buildings were too destroyed, and excavating was dangerous. The ash had hardened, yes, but it was unstable in places. People died in collapses while trying to dig. Eventually, people stopped trying. Pompeii was abandoned, left to its grave of ash and pumice, a ghost city under a gray blanket. Life went on, as it always does. My sisters got married, had children of their own. My mother lived to see her grandchildren, though she never smiled quite the same way after the eruption. I got married too. eventually. To a good woman who was patient with my nightmares and my silences. We had 3 children. I taught them my father's trade. I told them about their grandfather, about the man who died trying to save his possessions, who should have just run, who should have put his family first. I told them so they'd learn from his mistake, so they'd know that things don't matter. Possessions don't matter. Only people matter. Only life matters. But I never told them the whole story. Not like I'm telling you now. It was too much. Too painful. How do you explain to children that you watched the world end? That you're only alive because of luck and timing and choices that could have easily gone another way? I'm an old man now. I've lived a long life. Longer than I ever expected to after surviving Vesuvius. Longer than I probably deserved to. My wife has passed. My mother and sisters are gone too. Most of the other survivors I knew are dead. Soon I'll be gone as well, and the living memory of that terrible day will die with me. But I'm telling you this story because it needs to be remembered. Not just as a historical event, not just as a tragedy that happened to people in the past, but as a reminder of something important. We are fragile, all of us. Our lives, our cities, our civilizations, they can end in an instant. We build these elaborate societies, these complex systems, and we convince ourselves they're permanent, solid, safe, but they're not. They're built on unstable ground, literally and figuratively. And when that ground shifts, everything can come crashing down. Vesuvius didn't care about our buildings or our wealth or our plans for the future. It didn't care that Pompeii was a thriving city full of life and culture and commerce. It didn't care about the 20,000 people who called it home. Nature doesn't care about human concerns. It operates on scales of time and power that we can barely comprehend. And here's what really keeps me up at night, all these years later. Vesuvius is still there, still looming over the Bay of Naples. And there are people living around it again. Hundreds of thousands of them, maybe millions by now, I don't know. I'm too old to make the journey south to see for myself. Do they know what happened? Do they know they're living on borrowed time just like we were? Or have they convinced themselves, like we did, that it could never happen to them? Because here's the truth that took me decades to accept. The eruption wasn't a punishment from the gods. It wasn't because we were sinful or proud or greedy. It was just geology. Just pressure building up inside the earth until it had to be released. And it will happen again. Maybe not in my lifetime. Maybe not for hundreds or thousands of years. But that mountain will erupt again. And when it does, all those people living in its shadow will face the same choice as we faced. Run or stay. Save possessions or save lives. Risk everything for a few more moments in familiar surroundings or flee into the unknown. I hope they choose differently than we did. I hope they run early. I hope they prioritize people over things. I hope they don't make the same mistakes. But I know human nature. I know how we think. It won't happen to me. It won't happen today. I have time. Until you don't. You know what the hardest part has been? It's not the memories of the eruption itself, as terrible as those are. It's the guilt. Survivor's guilt, they'd probably call it today. The constant question of why I lived when so many others died. Why I was on the road to Herculaneum when the eruption started. Why my family left the city when we did. Why we went south instead of north, which put us just out of reach of the worst surges. Every decision we made, every choice, every moment of random chance, it all added up to survival. But if any one of those things had been different, even slightly, we'd have died too. If I'd left for Herculaneum an hour later, I'd have been in Pompeii when the eruption started. If my father had convinced my mother to wait for him, we'd have been in the city when the surge hit. If we'd gone to the harbor instead of heading inland, we'd have been trapped against the sea. So many ifs, so many tiny moments that meant the difference between life and death. I've spent years wondering about the people who died, the friends I grew up with, the merchants my father did business with, the family who lived next door to us. Did they suffer? Did they know what was happening? In those final moments, were they scared? I think about the people trapped in buildings when the surge hit. The ones who thought they were safe, who thought walls and roofs would protect them. They were wrong. The heat and gas got through. They died in their homes, in their supposed safe places. I think about the people who stayed behind to save their possessions, like my father. Were those last moments worth it? When they realized they'd waited too long, that they'd made the wrong choice, did they regret it? I hope my father's death was quick. I hope he didn't suffer. I hope he didn't spend his last moments regretting his decision, cursing himself for not leaving with us. But I'll never know. And that not knowing is its own kind of torture. I've also thought a lot about what the eruption revealed about human nature. In those terrible 3 days, I saw the best and worst of people. I saw incredible acts of kindness, strangers helping strangers, people sharing their last bits of food and water. Men and women risking their lives to save others, even when it meant endangering themselves. But I also saw selfishness, cruelty, people trampling over the weak to save themselves, theft, abandonment, the breakdown of social order when survival was at stake. Which is the real human nature, the kindness or the cruelty? I've spent my whole life trying to figure that out, and I still don't have an answer. Maybe we're capable of both. Maybe in normal times, society's rules and norms keep the worst impulses in check. But when those structures collapse, when it's life or death, our true nature emerges. And that nature is complex, contradictory, both heroic and horrific. In the years after the eruption, Pompeii became a cautionary tale, a symbol of divine wrath for some, of natural power for others. But mostly, it was just forgotten. The city was buried too deep to excavate with ancient technology. A few people tried to tunnel down to retrieve valuables, but most gave up. It was too dangerous, too difficult, too heartbreaking. Eventually, even the exact location of the city was forgotten. The landscape had changed so much that people couldn't tell where Pompeii had been. They knew there'd been a city there once, but the specifics faded from memory. Life went on. New settlements grew in the region. People returned to the fertile slopes of Vesuvius because the volcanic soil was too valuable to abandon. They rebuilt. They farmed. They lived their lives. And the mountain erupted again, multiple times over the centuries. Never quite as catastrophically as in 79 AD, but bad enough. And each time, people were surprised. Each time they hadn't believed it could happen. That's the thing about humans. We have short memories. We convince ourselves that past disasters can't repeat, that we're different, that we're safer, that we know better. But we don't. We really don't. I've heard rumors in recent years that people have been digging again around where Pompeii used to be. Treasure hunters looking for valuable artifacts. I don't know if it's true. I'm too old to travel south and see for myself. Part of me hopes they don't find anything. Part of me wants Pompeii to stay buried. It's a tomb, and tombs should be respected. But another part of me hopes they do excavate it someday. I hope they uncover the streets I walked on, the houses I knew, the forum where I spent lazy afternoons with my friends, the bathhouse, the theaters, the temples. Not for the treasure, not for the artifacts, but for the memory. Because when Pompeii is uncovered, and I believe it will be, someday, centuries from now, it will be a time capsule, a snapshot of life frozen in an instant. Future generations will be able to see exactly how we lived, what we ate, how we dressed, what we valued. They'll see the graffiti on our walls, the political slogans, the declarations of love, the crude jokes and insults, all the everyday details of normal life. And maybe, just maybe, they'll learn something from our fate. Maybe they'll look at Vesuvius and respect its power. Maybe they'll make better choices than we did. Maybe they'll prioritize safety over profit, lives over possessions. Or maybe they'll make the same mistakes we did. Maybe human nature doesn't change. Maybe each generation has to learn the same lessons the hard way. I don't know. I won't be around to see it. I'm dying. I don't have much time left. Maybe days, maybe weeks. The physician tells me it's my heart. Worn out after so many years of beating, I'm ready. I've lived a full life. I've had love and loss, joy and sorrow, success and failure. I've raised children and seen grandchildren. I've done what I could with the time I was given. But before I go, I wanted to tell this story one last time. To leave a record, to make sure someone knows what happened, what it was really like. Not the sanitized historical version, but the messy, terrifying, human truth of it. If you're hearing this story centuries from now, in a world I can't even imagine, please understand something. We weren't that different from you. We loved our families. We worried about money. We complained about the weather and politics. We had hopes and dreams and fears. We were just people, regular people living regular lives. And then, in 3 days, everything changed. Everything ended. It can happen to you, too. Maybe not a volcano, maybe something else. An earthquake, a flood, a plague, war, economic collapse. There are 1,000 ways the world can end, and we never think it will happen to us, until it does. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Not fear, though fear is appropriate. Not despair, though despair is understandable. But awareness, preparedness, appreciation. Be aware that the world is not as stable as it seems. That everything you take for granted can disappear in an instant. That nature is powerful and we are fragile. Be prepared. Have a plan. Know how you'll protect yourself and your loved ones when disaster strikes. Don't wait. Don't assume you'll have time. You might not. And most importantly, appreciate what you have. The people around you, the life you're living. Don't waste time arguing about trivial things. Don't sacrifice relationships for possessions. Don't take a single day for granted. Because none of us know when our time will come, when our mountain will erupt, when our normal day will become our last day. I was 17 when Vesuvius erupted. I'm 82 now. I've lived 65 years longer than I might have. 65 years I almost didn't get. Every single day has been a gift, a bonus. Time I wasn't supposed to have. And I've tried, gods know I've tried, to make those years matter, to honor the memory of everyone who didn't make it out. My father, my friends, the 20,000 souls who died in those 3 terrible days. I've tried to live a good life, to be a good man, to raise good children, to leave the world slightly better than I found it. Have I succeeded? I don't know. That's not for me to judge. But I've tried. And I suppose that's all any of us can do. My message to you, to anyone hearing this story, is simple. Live. Really live. Don't just exist. Don't just go through the motions. Embrace every moment. Love deeply. Forgive quickly. Don't sweat the small stuff. Remember what matters. Because I've seen what it looks like when everything ends. I've watched the world burn and crumble and disappear under ash. And in those final moments, none of the things we thought were important actually mattered. The money didn't matter. The possessions didn't matter. The status, the reputation, the career, the house, the jewelry, the fine clothes. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the people we loved and whether we'd get to see them again. My father died trying to save money and goods. He made the wrong choice. But I understand why he did it. He'd spent his whole life building that business. It represented years of work, of sacrifice, of dreams for the future. How could he just walk away from it? But he should have. He absolutely should have. Because all of that stuff, all of that wealth, it's buried under Pompeii now. Gone. Useless. And he's gone too, when he could have lived, could have escaped with us, could have rebuilt somewhere else. Don't make his mistake. When your mountain erupts, and it will in some form or another, run. Run immediately. Run without looking back. Grab your loved ones and run, and don't waste a single second on anything else. Your life is more valuable than any possession. Your family is more important than any career. Your survival matters more than any amount of money. Remember that. Please remember that, and remember Pompeii. Remember the 20,000 people who died because they didn't understand the danger or didn't react fast enough or made the wrong choices. Remember that we were real, that we lived and loved and laughed and dreamed just like you. We're not just a historical footnote. We're not just an ancient tragedy that happened to people who don't matter anymore. We were human. We mattered. Our lives had value. Our deaths had meaning. And if our deaths can teach you something, if our tragedy can help you survive your own disasters, then maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Maybe there's some purpose in our suffering. I don't know if there's an afterlife. I don't know if I'll see my father again, or my wife, or my mother and sisters. I don't know if the gods are real or if death is just the end. But I know this. I survived Vesuvius. I lived when I should have died. And I've tried to make that survival mean something. Now it's your turn. You've heard my story. You know what happened and why. You understand the lessons I learned at such terrible cost. Don't waste them. Don't ignore them. Don't convince yourself it can't happen to you. Because it can. It absolutely can. And when it does, I hope you make better choices than we did. I hope you run faster. I hope you prioritize correctly. I hope you survive. Live well. Love deeply. And never take a single day for granted. This is Marcus, survivor of Mount Vesuvius, signing off for the last time. Remember us. Remember Pompeii. Remember what we learned, and may you never have to learn those lessons yourself. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more historical deep dives and survival stories. Drop a comment below and let me know. Would you have run immediately, or would you have tried to save your possessions? What would you do if a disaster struck your city today? Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, because the lessons from Pompeii are just as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Remember, live intentionally, love deeply, and always know your escape route. Stay safe out there.